It's me again.
Thank you. Righto, so tell us all we need to know about your greenhouse gas reductions department, please.
Well, kia ora koutou. I am actually genuinely excited to be here to have the entire sustainability working group from across the CCHL group of companies. So I think this has been postponed about 5 times due to various diaries on your side and our side, but I'm pleased that we've got everybody here in the room today to share what is an exciting time in this particular space. I'll leave it to Alana to introduce the rest of the team as they come up, because we have got a little bit of time for every entity to present their own individual perspective. But to introduce Alana Kidd joined us a month ago, and I think the first thing I said is we've got an emissions reduction progress workshop to have with council. So this has been on her mind from day one. So she's hit the ground running in that respect, but she joined us from Ravensdown, where she was head of sustainability, and prior roles at Becca and the United Nations. I guess just to set the scene, the frustration over recent years with respect to emissions reduction is it's been and we've been, and I think many in the industry have been, consumed by reporting obligations and climate disclosures and what goes along with that. So we're very pleased to have put out our first climate disclosures report last year, and we'll continue to do so as we're captured by the reporting regime that goes with being having listed bonds issued on the NZX. But really, and I hope you get a sense of this today, we're looking to move the focus well beyond disclosure, and the team will bring the actions that we're taking to light in the seminar today. A big challenge will always be cost. We're looking to refresh aspects of this at the moment, and I guess what you can hopefully take away is that, you know, with a group working together, this is really leveraging the strengths of the group to work together to invest in best for group decarbonisation initiatives, and you know, the sustainability working group that you see here today is critical to achieving this. So I'll pass to Alana to take it away, but yeah, any questions we'll save those for the end. We'll be right. Thanks.
Thank you. Tēnā koutou katoa. So we understand that the focus for today is emissions reduction across Christchurch City Holdings, and we're going to take you through what the climate change impact of those businesses that are part of the group is, and the target reductions that we're aiming for. And then we've got a number of experts from across the group that will present progress across those specific entities. I wanted to set a clear purpose, because there is a range of sustainability work and other climate change work, risk and resilience work happening across the group, but today we're going to focus on specifically greenhouse gas reduction, the program and progress of that. And also to sort of set the scene, many of you will know this, but we will refer to this terminology throughout. So I wanted to start by clarifying that greenhouse gas emissions are classified as scope 1, 2 or 3 for an entity. Scope 1 being those emissions that are directly controlled by that organisation. So typically it's fossil fuels that are combusted on site. Scope 2 is purchased electricity, so that's energy that is for your use, but the combustion takes place off-site. Of course, except in the case of Orion, because they have a more direct involvement in that, in electricity. And then scope 3 is all emissions that take place upstream and downstream of your organisation that are not within your control, but often are areas of influence and are therefore also important. That influence can be through materials selection, supplier selection, that sort of thing. And as the graphic shows, scope 3 emissions are typically far greater than that of those direct scope 1 and 2 emissions. So you will hear a bit about work undertaken to reduce emissions across all those areas today, because they're all important for different reasons. This is a picture of CCHL's greenhouse gas footprint, the direct footprint, the scope 1 and 2 footprint of the group. Interestingly, so it's about 33,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide, which interestingly is almost exactly the same as Christchurch City Council's direct emissions, about 33,000 tonnes. And also for scale, as a little man, the average New Zealander's footprint is 7.5 tonnes, to give you an idea. And those big contributions are largely from Orion, Littleton Port Company and City Care across City Care's national operations. These are really simple graphs, but I wanted to recognise that there's a huge amount of data that sits behind them, and there's a really robust historical record of emissions across the group, which is really valuable to us when we're setting out a decarbonisation plan. So that plan, this graph here, if you look at so there's a dotted red line along the top, that's business as usual emissions out to 2050. The green dotted line is the target emissions following a 1.5 degree pathway aligned with the science to keep warming below 1.5 degrees. And in between, you can see a range of reduction initiatives. And this tool is really valuable to us because we can switch on and off various investments at different times and see what impact those decisions will have on the greenhouse gas footprint over time. So it's a really, really useful tool. And as you can see, numbers are a little bit small, but when you look at 2030, we're capable of meeting that 2030 sort of trajectory and not that far off 2040. But when you look out to 2050, there is quite a gap there that's going to be reliant on technological developments, other things that will, we hope, come into play over the coming decades. And yeah, each of the subsidiaries has their own emissions reduction plan. This is sort of a compilation of those. So now I want to show some of the specific projects that are going on within the group, and we'll start with Pip Newland, who is the Head of Sustainability and Risk at Orion. So she'll take you through the Orion position, and then we'll move through some of the other subsidiaries, and then invite questions at the end.
Tēnā koutou katoa. So I'm Pip. I am Head of Sustainability, Risk and Insights at Orion. So I support the greenhouse gas emissions reduction, risk reporting and also demand forecast modelling for Orion. So I think the key point to start with really is that decarbonisation is an energy transition. So we're shifting from fossil fuel to renewable and low carbon. And when thinking about energy, you need to think about the whole system. So it's not just electrification, it's actually currently it's looking at transport, process heat, various ways that people use and consume energy. And so globally, the challenge is often how to transition electricity generation first. And we've got a head start there in New Zealand. So we're about 88% renewable. And as a result, electrification is really the solution to much of New Zealand's decarbonisation challenge, recognising that currently only around 28% of New Zealand's total energy consumption is from renewable sources. So what does that mean? It means that alongside a transition to 98% renewable electricity generation from that 88% renewable currently, we're looking at about 8.7 megatons worth of emissions that will be reduced by 2030 across New Zealand. So it's a challenge, but it's also a big opportunity. We're looking at about $22 billion worth of investment in distribution nationally by 2030, and up to or circa kind of 70 billion by 2050. So that's just in distribution networks. And that's based on some modelling done by the Boston Consulting Group, which is publicly available if anyone would like to have a closer look at that report. It's really interesting. It also has some stuff on generation as well. Moving on from this point, this is very specific to Orion and the Orion network, which covers both Christchurch and Selwyn district greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a pretty broad brush of the transition over the next 10 years for the Christchurch and Selwyn districts, and it's based off total consumption. But it's worth remembering that our network is typically designed and built to accommodate peak demand, and we're looking at around a 40% increase in peak demand by 2050. So something to be aware of. So a few things to call out. The avoided emissions shown as the negative on this graph are just process heat and land transport avoided emissions from electrification. So that's kind of around 15% or 15 to 20% worth of demand growth. A lot of the rest of our demand growth is associated with urban growth. The small dark green sliver at the top is our total scope 1, 2, including distribution losses and controllable scope 3 emissions. So that big bar chart that you saw at the start and the big wedge, that's included in that green. The pale green area is emissions associated with how our network is built. So it's scope 3 influence. So that's typically embodied carbon and service delivery provider emissions. And that's a really conservative view of that. So some of the build that's recognised as emissions in that pale green area is associated with things that we haven't counted as avoided emissions. So that's that urban growth and development, but actually also building network that serves generation. So the opportunity here, and the thing to kind of bear in mind, is really that the opportunity sits in electrification, and also how this is done also solves a lot of that pale green scope 3 emissions source challenge. So it's not an and or, it's an and. So what does that look like? It looks like focusing in on transport and how we manage transport emissions, including electrification and utilising transport as a distributed energy resource, because that's the way technology currently is going. It's looking at generation within our network region in terms of resilience, and good spatial planning, so co-location of activities, and empowered communities in terms of encouraging that kind of resilience and diversity of how people use and consume electricity that suits them. Because the key thing that we need to bear in mind is it's not just about investment to enable decarbonisation. There's a balance in there about investing to maintain decarbonisation, resilience, and also affordability for the community that uses that electricity that we carry. This is sort of taking it back down into just specifically the Orion Group emissions, bearing in mind these include Kinetics, which is our wholly owned subsidiary. So the big chunk there is that pale green bar. So that's the 83% that sits in sort of how we design and build our network and how we meet the needs of our community. The pale blue wedge is our distribution losses, currently at about 13%. We're actually not they are actually being taken care of as the grid mix changes. And so I'll put in, by way of example there, they've already dropped about 4,500 tonnes just by virtue of the fact that the grid is becoming more renewable. And then the final sort of 4% is the operational emissions in terms of our fleet. There's also a couple of challenges in there that tend to crop up around SF6 emissions. So that's a circuit breaker gas that we use. It's very high greenhouse gas emissions. And also when we have an emergency outage, we use generators which currently burn diesel. And so that can kind of come in and create a bit of a bump in our footprint at times. So I'll whiz through that. That's it in a nutshell. I'll hand over to who's next.
And next we've got Claire Waghorn, who's the Sustainability Transition Lead at Christchurch International Airport.
Thank you.
No worries, thank you. Kia ora koutou. Thank you. Christchurch Airport started measuring its emissions in 2006. And so the journey in relation to our Scope 1 and 2 emissions has been a long time. A long piece of work, of which the initial focus was in-house, so it was entirely Scope 1 and 2 emissions and what projects could we undertake to reduce those emissions. On the graph at the moment, you'll see the dark line is the emissions reductions of the airport, and the lighter line was the science-based targets projection. So back in 2020, the airport was 14 years ahead of its science-based targets in terms of its Scope 1 and 2 emissions. So it's a really good news story in terms of what the airport's been able to do within its own operational control. To give you a sense of scale, the airport Scope 1 and 2 is currently 280 tonnes, which is the equivalent to maybe a small hotel. It's been recognised globally as a world-leading airport, and we mentor other airports and what they can do to reduce their own operational emissions. The wins for us has been ground source heat pump system, which replaced diesel generators and saw an emissions reduction piece of around a drop in about 70%. Also really cost effective. It was commercially sound. We've saved $500,000 in operating and maintenance costs. So anybody that says it's too expensive, the airport is an example of what an orderly transition looks like. They factored it in with their asset planning early. There's been a lot of vehicle and fleet transitions. We've transitioned 93% of our fleet to electric vehicles, and the ones that are remaining are just a couple of utility vehicles and our fire truck fleet, of which that's in the process of being transitioned. And we lobbied early for that. So before they were manufacturing these vehicles, we were writing to the manufacturers and asking them to create the technology we needed. So the Scope 1 and 2 story is a good one, but that's not the whole story. We also have a goal in this space of getting to absolute zero emissions by 2035. Now, in terms of, this is just a very quick slide, fundamentals of aviation, because often we find it's not well understood, the various components involved. Particularly in relation to climate, a lot of people think of aviation as being a nice to have, and it's really just holiday makers going on to tropical island holidays and such. But a lot of our global trade relies on aviation, our rapid medical response. It's the aircrafts that take the fuel, that buy the fuel, that use the fuel, and the airports are the infrastructure, which is where we sit. But while the Scope 1 and 2 emissions are really nicely under control, Scope 3 emissions for the airport are incredibly challenging, and that's why aviation is a hard-to-abate sector. Again, to give you a sense of scale, if I mentioned we were 280 tonnes, flight emissions sit around 800,000. So that's about 3% of global emissions, which is the same as data processing and storage emissions. It's the same as Indonesia's emissions. It's a big challenge. But in that respect, it's also an opportunity. If we can impact that, then that's a big impact. If we can reduce it, then that's a considerable impact. So at the airport, we measure everything. We do full flight emissions. It's independently audited. Some places only do the landing and takeoff cycles. So once you measure full flight emissions, it gives you a really good indication of where you need to be focusing on to have a material climate impact. This graph here shows you full flight emissions are just the largest chunk of the pie. The next big piece is those land transport connections to the airport, so folk coming by vehicles into the airport. We also have a bit of building and construction embodied emissions with the property development at the airport, but by and large, the piece of the puzzle that we need to be working towards is what do we do about those aviation emissions? Now, some of it is outside of our control. People don't fly here to come and visit Christchurch Airport. They come to spend time in the wilderness. They come to use the wonderful facilities that our city has on offering. So Te Pai, Electric Avenue is massive. And they come via carriers that decide on what planes, what fleet, what fuel to purchase. So those things are outside of our control, but that doesn't mean we're leaning away from the challenge. Oh, and actually to add to that, there's been some really interesting examples of what happens if you cap. So after the earthquakes, there was almost like a natural cap put on Christchurch. We didn't have planes flying in here, but that didn't actually impact the overall aviation emissions of New Zealand at all. They just peaked in Auckland and peaked in Queenstown at that time. The same with Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam. They put a cap on there, and Brussels and Eindhoven just went through the roof in terms of their volumes. So in terms of looking at what we can actually do from the airport's perspective, we've got a series of what we call no regrets moves. And to Pip's point earlier, a large amount of this transition is an energy play. We're trying to displace jet fuel with a cleaner alternative. When we look at aviation and what that transition could look like, we're seeing, electric aircraft up to maybe the 11-seater. They've got battery payload issues beyond that. Then there's hydrogen, liquid hydrogen as an aviation fuel. And that could be the solution for domestic aviation, possibly even as far as Trans-Tasman. And then beyond that, for those long-haul flights, sustainable aviation fuel, which is just like a form of biofuel, a really refined form. To make both green hydrogen, electric charging, green hydrogen, and sustainable aviation fuel, a large amount of energy is needed, additional energy. To do the transition for our domestic fleet over to green hydrogen is about 15% of New Zealand's entire energy load. And that's why we're looking at our renewable energy precinct on the western side of the airport and starting with a 170 megawatt solar farm. And that's a no regrets move because it doesn't jump ahead and say, look, it's definitely hydrogen technology, although all the indicators are saying that way. Either way, we know more energy is needed and it has to be clean energy if we want to have an impact. We've also recently installed the Southern Hemisphere's largest EV charging, rapid charging site, the GigaHub. We've got the first electric fire truck in the Southern Hemisphere. Again, that was the one that we really lobbied Rosenbauer to create, and we've got another one coming shortly. We had New Zealand's first electric aircraft flight from 2020. They still operate at the airport. And we've got a hydrogen testing facility on site. And each of these are just constantly looking at that big picture transition and asking ourselves, but what could we do now to help move that along? We also sit on a couple of international working groups in this space. So one working on the concept of operations for future low carbon aircraft at airports. Another one looking at airport carbon best practice and how we can push airports globally to set higher standards for themselves. And we also spend time mentoring airports. But there's still a huge amount of work to be done, and thank you for the time and understanding in this space. I think that's probably it. On to questions.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Very good, thank you.
We'll stay in the transport theme and go to Dr. Crystal Linke, who's the Head of Environment and Sustainability at LPC.
Kia ora koutou. So I thought I would start out first by just providing an overview of LPC's emissions. So LPC has been measuring emissions, so our scope 1, 2, and selected scope 3 since 2018. But last year, FY24, was the first time that we actually calculated our full value chain, so our full scope 3. And we will be adding a few more things over time. But as you can see from this graph, scope 3, and as Alana and others had pointed out, makes up the majority of our emissions profile. Ships emissions, they contribute the most out of these. And these three categories that you see, ship emissions, purchase goods and services, and employee commuting, account for 98% of our scope 3. In terms of our direct emissions, so scope 1, this comes from the diesel that is used in our large mobile plants across our 3 sites, with 50% of the emissions coming from the straddles that are operating in our container terminal. And like others, we also have scope 2, but it's very much a small percentage. And LPC has been purchasing renewable energy certificates since 2021. And we just recently signed a new 5-year power purchase agreement with Meridian to continue this as well. So we're very much focused on our direct emissions, and this is where we have the most control. I think hopefully this graph looks a little bit familiar. It very much follows what you would have seen from the group emissions reduction plan. And the reason that we're focusing on our own direct emissions is that they also contribute heavily to CCHL achieving their targets. Now, this ERP that you see in front of you in these initiatives, they're based on our current BAU operations as they stand today. It doesn't take into account any expansion or potential expansion at Te Harapari Bay. We have modeled that emissions profile separately. So probably as you can see from here, we haven't made any significant reductions over the past few years. Our first reductions that you can see from around 2020 are largely associated with the replacement of our diesel straddles to diesel electric. And the way that our emissions reduction plan, we will start to see quite significant reductions over the next few years. And that's due to replacing our assets at end of life. So about 99% of the emissions reduction initiatives comes from 4 sources. The first is electrification of our straddles, our marine vessels, so our tugs and pilot boat, and the container handling equipment in our inland ports. So this is largely around reach stackers and empty container handlers. We're also quite reliant on the continued purchase of the renewable energy certificates in order to meet our 2030 target. And I think from this, LPC actually is in a unique position, and we can distinguish ourselves from other ports around New Zealand because we do have the potential to almost fully electrify our 3 sites, or at least have low carbon assets operating across the 3. We can be more ambitious. The technology is there. It's not there for everything. It's not there for some of our coal equipment, but obviously we don't really know what's happening with coal at the moment. So we can reduce more than what is shown here, but it does take quite a significant capital investment. When we originally modeled this work a couple years ago, we were looking at a net CapEx investment of $70 million. Now that has changed as we get better data, and our asset management team has been doing a heap of work looking at asset utilization over the last few months. So these numbers will be constantly updating. We've also looked at whether, instead of buying outright, we move to more lease agreements, because most of our assets particularly our container handling equipment, only has generally a lifespan of around 7 to 8 years. So I thought I would just touch on ship emissions because it is something that we do get asked about quite a bit at the port, but also because the way that we measure emissions does differ from the council. So what you would see in the council inventory are these numbers. Now, and this is really because it's not comparing apples to apples. Now, those numbers are from FY22, whereas our number is from FY24. So the way that the council, and Lisa can pop in here if I say this wrong, is similar to aviation emissions. So you're looking at ship emissions from port to port and then divided by half. whereas LPC has decided to take what we call an operational control approach, and this is following guidance out of ports in the US, so the likes of Long Beach and Los Angeles, and also some of the ports in Australia. So we measure emissions as ships transit our channel, when they're maneuvering, so when they're met with the tugs, when they're on berth, and when they're at anchorage. And what we found is that 87% of emissions are when vessels are at berth, which makes sense. This is when they're using their auxiliary engines to power the vessel. And this is really, I guess, the only time that LPC can actually influence emissions reduction is when they're at berth. But unfortunately, it's not just as simple as a ship coming into berth and we plug it in. LPC, along with a number of other ports within New Zealand, we lack the electrical infrastructure. We just don't actually have the juice to plug them in. If we were to say plug in cruise vessels, we would blacken out all of Christchurch and probably parts of Canterbury and have a lot of unhappy people with the ports. There's also the infrastructure that's required on the vessels. Unfortunately, we get a lot of the old vessels coming to New Zealand. The shipping lines that we've talked to and the other ports I've talked to are just not willing at the moment to invest in that technology, particularly because we don't know what type of vessels are coming in the future, whether that's a combination of methanol fueled ammonia, hydrogen vessels. So it's kind of chicken and the egg scenario. What do you invest in? It's probably going to be a mix. LPC also needs to prepare that if these vessels are coming, that we can bunker, refuel them. So there is a bit of work to do in this space, and I'm not here to say that we aren't doing anything. We have applied to ECA for funding to upgrade our inner harbor jetties in order to supply power to fishing vessels, particularly during their layup season. And if we were to do this, we could be saving around 3,000 tons per annum. So there's something that we're working on at the moment. And I guess, lastly, I wanted to talk about some of our other projects, because whilst the emissions and change of our large assets plays a really big part in our decarbonization, it's not everything that we do. Our maintenance team has been investigating tire optimization for our straddles over the last few years, as well as looking at driving behavior and trying to minimize idling times in some of our large plants. We're about to implement the Work to Ride program for our employees starting in FY26. And for us, this is really exciting because, as you know, particularly for the poor, you either have to go over some big passes, and now that we can't take our bikes through the tunnel. So there is a lot of interest, particularly for those who want to purchase electric bikes, but might be out of their reach, get them biking to the port, which would be really fantastic. We're also doing a lot of work looking at what does increased rail connections between Midland and the port look like. We have the capacity, and I'm sure Graham has talked to you about this and others before, to put another rail line in at the port and move the majority of, or the percentage of freight that gets moved from road to rail up to about 40-odd%. Currently, we're doing only about 20, and our capacity kind of maxes out at 22-23% with rail. So I think that should be a big focus for us in the future. And also doing quite a bit of work with the other ports around New Zealand. We have come together and developed our own sector guidance for Scope 3 reporting. Like Claire, we, working with other, airports around the world. And we have a really great team and an environmental forum where we share ideas around the New Zealand ports. So that's just kind of an overview of what we're doing at LPC. So thank you for your time.
Wonderful, thank you.
I'll pass it on to.
Yeah, we've got one more quick slide on city care, and then a bit of a summary. So we've got Melissa Keys, who's Sustainability and Environment Manager at City Care Group.
Thank you.
So kia ora koutou. So for City Care Group, so annually our scope 1 and 2 emissions are around 8,000 tonnes of CO2 equivalent, and that is from City Care Property, City Care Water, and our 2 subsidiaries, Spencer Henshaw and Apex Water. Of those 8,000 tonnes, 98% are from fuel from our fleet, which is primarily from diesel. We've set financial year 22 as our base year because that's the year that we acquired Spencer Henshaw and also sold the asphalt plant. And in that time, we've made an absolute reduction of around 3% across the group. We also have developed a emissions intensity factor, so we're able to track the impact of our initiatives without being influenced by growth across the group. So our intensity factor is our normalised emissions, which is scope 1 and 2 emissions per dollar of revenue earned. So since that time, we have made a reduction of 22% with our normalised emissions. Our reduction initiatives are very much fleet focused. So these include purchasing low emission vehicles. So for example, within City Care Property, we have a policy that any new passenger vehicle we purchase is either hybrid or battery electric. We also have a small number of electric ATVs, vans, plug-in hybrid vehicles, and 1 electric truck. City Care Water also has a number of hybrid utes and electric vans in their fleet as well. We have important thing for us is to trial technologies as they come in. So we've done a number of electric mower trials over the years in City Care Property, and we currently have a couple of the new BYD hybrid plug-in hybrid utes in our fleet, which we are trialing. Alongside that, a really important focus for us is on optimization of our existing fleet. So we're using data from our Navman and eRoads systems to identify opportunities for us to downsize our existing fleets, to right size our fleets, which is looking at where we can replace some of our heavier vehicles such as utes with smaller passenger vehicles, so we can, without compromising operational performance while reducing our emissions. We also have a number of things underway around improving driver behaviour. We have drivers attending SAFID driver training courses, which are focused on both increasing fuel efficiency and increasing safety on the roads, and looking at initiatives around reducing idling time as well, and trip planning. And so these are really important initiatives for us because not only do they reduce our emissions, they're also reducing our operational costs, and also have the wider co-benefit of increasing safety as well for our people and our community. We're not without our challenges. So one of our big challenges is the capital investment required to purchase low emission vehicles to meet our 2030 target is unaffordable. And I can hand on heart say with regret that currently we are not on track to meet our 2030 science-based target. But we're doing everything that we can to do that through the things I mentioned above. Another challenge for us is that we're a contract business, as you know, and price is still very much the primary driver in procurement decisions. Many of our customers are not willing or able to actually pay the premium for us to deliver low carbon contractual services to them at this point. Another challenge for us is that there is a lack of suitable low emission heavier vehicles such as trucks and machinery for us to replace our existing fleet at a reasonable cost, which is where doing those EV trials comes into play. Yeah, that's all from me today. Thank you very much for your time.
Very good. Good.
Thanks, Melissa. We've got some highlights here. In the interest of time, I just want to call out the ones that we haven't mentioned yet. So at the top there, enable. They have that's a great position to be in, where your activity is increasing in terms of connection numbers, while their emissions footprint is trending downwards. And EcoCentral on the left there, who have embraced electric plant options and very successfully, and also looked at site layout optimization for less movements of plant around the site. And then, yeah, just to sort of sum up the picture, really, we, in some cases, some of the subsidiaries have really long and robust records of greenhouse gas emissions data, which is really helpful to us going forward. And having those systems in place is really important. The targets are designed to limit more warming to 1.5, and they absolutely have to be. Any target less than that or more than that is not enough now. A lot of progress has been made on those direct Scope 1 and 2 emissions over the last 5 to 10 years. And we do have to turn our attention to that wider role in terms of what influence we can have over those Scope 3 emissions as well. Like the council, we have a lot of influence in that space and can reduce emissions there as well. And finally, we need to maintain this as a priority in strategic long-term decisions. So yeah, that Scope 1 and 2 reduction area is, as you've seen, it translates to good, efficient, resilient businesses. And so we'll continue to look for innovative solutions there. And then in the Scope 3 influence space, we can kind of be at the forefront of those transitions and be well positioned for the future. And that is also where the collaboration opportunities lie, which we are always looking for opportunities in that space. Other than that, keen to hear any feedback or questions that you have.
Thank you.
And thanks to all the speakers.
Yeah, I've got a few here. I'd just like to say thank you very much. I know it's been a while. It's been a wee while for you to be able to get in front of us, but it's certainly very clear, and it's good to have people from the separate subsidiaries putting their point of view across in their presentation. So it's been clear, and I've just said to Mary, I'd actually like us. I know someone said, might have been you, that the council's emissions are about the same as your group. Is that right? I'd like to have ours written in exactly the same format in theory, so we can put them side by side, so it's easy to see. Right, we have Aaron.
Yeah, I've got two questions. One is none of the modelling, like the transition to lots of electrical, makes perfect sense, but none of it is modelling in cost explosions in electricity, like demand drives cost, and we've seen that in the last year, a number of businesses, larger ones, closing down operations because electricity is just too expensive. So that's a big danger in this, but it's not highlighted in any of these, or the mitigations around how that gets undone.
Yeah, I might call on Pip to help answer this one. I know she'll have the answer top of her mind.
It's all cost based, and yes, you could go to a clean transition, but what is the cost of that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think, I'm not sure if you heard Transpower speaking at the Downstream conference earlier this week, and talked about the importance of the transition not being effectively deindustrialising, which is effectively you achieve your emissions reduction by business shutting down. Because that's
So like collapsing your entire
effectively
economy.
Yeah, so that's not what we want.
Okay,
the
that's good
idea
stuff.
is that you're investing to enable affordable electricity for people, and so that requires a combination of things. It requires advanced thinking about what their energy transition looks like, and it requires investment, timely investment in the right places. And so the airport's probably a really good example of where that's actually occurring. They've thought about it in advance, they've invested in advance, and they're on track. So I can give you some broad brush numbers. So if you plan in advance and invest in advance, we're looking at about a $10 billion NPV benefit to the economy from 2050 if you start, like, effectively it's never too late to start. So if you're actually actively engaged in that energy transition conversation, investing in the right places and incentivizing the right things.
So what does that mean? A $10 billion what?
Effectively, so it's discounted back. So you're going to save effectively $10 billion in today's terms.
Right.
Starting to invest now rather than waiting until down the track when you're facing derailment risk because you've got physical hazards alongside both decarbonisation hazards to deal with. So what that looks like in terms of electricity investment is ongoing investment in resilience to physical hazards so that people are actually trusting the supply that they have. It's incentivising diverse solutions so that it's not all centrally controlled by kind of Big Brother, effectively. It's enabling each business to actually understand their own energy needs and invest for their own energy needs. And what we're seeing is technology coming through to enable people to do that. So that includes generation on site, it includes storage on site, it includes innovative pricing to encourage flexibility markets. There's actually a whole world of opportunity in there that, provided the right incentives are provided, people can actually benefit from investment in their own energy resilience and participation in those markets. So when you're looking nationally in terms of shifting from a hydro heavy and a fossil fuel heavy response to peaking, and then shifting into kind of more flexible and innovative solutions to that peaking issue as we become more intermittent and renewable, that's another opportunity for investment in terms of how you serve that. So I suppose the big message there is that there's actually a big opportunity in investment in energy, and it's an opportunity in both generation but actually also in markets in terms of how people use their energy and in how you kind of transport the energy from place to place.
Thank you.
And then
Aaron,
pick one other.
Yeah, well, I've got still
Sorry.
got 5, and we're running out of time. So your question may be answered in the new question.
I would doubt it.
Right, that would be right.
It would be a first. It happens
Just
about once
having a
every
wee
3 years.
dream there. Tim, please.
Thank you. Look, years ago, Wellington Port bought a brand new forklift, but they couldn't use it because its point weights, once it was loaded, exceeded the weight on some of the wharves, etc. So when we're looking at Littleton Port, for instance, and we talk about and on slide 16, you've got 3 photos of different equipment, but they've all got point weights. I'm just wondering, with future planning, is that being taken into account that the Littleton infrastructure can take the extra weights and loading for electric vehicles? Because we know that with electric buses, when they brake and accelerate, the weight is times 35 times the weight on the 4 points or the 6 points of the wheels. So I'm just wondering, if we're looking at future planning, has Littleton taken that into account? Or, and Matt, I guess, is that something that CCHL really needs to double check with their companies?
Yeah, absolutely. It's in the elements of the detail behind these. There's a lot more to be done. I mean, our focus is on getting the right investment at the right time, and the Orion take is just a piece of that. And as we invest in this, it's a matter of weighing up. Can the infrastructure support it? When are the assets reaching end of life? Do we have the capital to support it at that time? There's a whole bundle of things, but it's a good point. You can do all those other things right, and then forget about the wharf can't actually support it.
So we don't want Phil to cut a ribbon on something we can't use. Just now.
Okay, Yanni, please.
Thank you. Just had 2 questions. One was, quite a long time ago, council did an MOU with Nissan and Renault, right before EV cars started coming online, and we said we were going to do a whole bunch of wonderful stuff. We basically did nothing. Just looking across the companies and thinking about your transition, and particularly around things like fleet purchases, I guess I'm a bit baffled by so many different types of vehicles, and I wondered whether we'd consider doing anything like strategically joint up procuring EVs together. The obvious one to me is BYD, which seems to have very good battery technology, a range of different hybrids, electric cars, and then also a kind of joint up approach around EV charging strategy as a city, because again, it seems very, Orion's doing their thing, we're doing our thing. It's not joint up at all. People see the chargers on council land, but some are owned by Orion, some are owned by us. We've got different pricing mechanisms. So I'm just wondering, in that kind of scheme of the electrification, particularly around EVs, what the joint up approach is across council, companies and the organisation, or if there's a way we can get an improved.
Yeah, it's something I've talked to Lana about as we've been around the various entities, and the time here is identifying those common problems, and one of those, not across the board, but with a number of the entities, is fleet, and how do we make that, are there decisions we can make centrally to support everybody and get the best outcome possibly there. So that's something that's absolutely live on the fleet as a common challenge, and how we do that. But as you probably heard today, there are various forms of vehicles that are needed across the board. There's not one homogenous four-wheel drive sort of solution here that solves everything. So yeah, it's something we're working on. On the charging front, Pip can possibly talk to this again, but this is mostly about, our role as an Orion is an enabler of the sector to provide that charging infrastructure. Orion did provide some early charging infrastructure in the initial phases of EV rollouts in New Zealand, but now there are a number of other players that are actively pursuing that, and we want to be an absolute enabler of doing that and those charging stations wherever possible.
The cost of EV charging is now almost greater than driving a hybrid. The cost of using an EV is almost probably greater in some cases than the cost of hybrid. So we've got a risk around the private sector no regulation around charging, that actually we don't try to achieve the change that we want for the environment. But anyway,
most of that should cost is the capital cost of setting up and getting a return on capital.
The other thing is around the port.
Yanni, we've still got 4 more people, and we're out.
I'm happy just to get a memo back, but we did pass a resolution around an environmental and a social levy on cruise ships, and it would be really good to get the information back about what's been done in that space, recognising offsetting the carbon impact.
Thanks. Yep, thank you. Tyler, please.
Kia ora, guys. I've got really quick ones, actually, Mr. Mayor. I think Yanni's sort of asked the question, but I was really interested in the purchasing of vehicles in comparison to leasing of, around the sustainability and also the depreciation of these vehicles. I'm not sure what that looks like. But if there is going to be a memo back, I'd love to get that checked in. So this is for LPC. So the first question is for LPC is, why are we going off the US and Australian standards for monitoring our emissions in comparison to what CCC does?
It was following just the guidance and then that methodology. The way that generally councils in New Zealand measure the emissions is that you take it from port to port, and then you allocate 50% of the emissions to that region. So that takes into account, to and from. The guidance that we followed out of the US EPA is generally where ports, say for us and for Long Beach, it's around where you have the operational control. So if we are comparing, ourselves to Auckland, we would have to be looking at emissions from, first port of call. So Auckland would get emissions from, say, more from Singapore or Asia, whereas we would get the second port of call. So the emissions are quite different. So the US EPA methodology is basically taking into account all of the different factors that go into a vessel. So this is looking at your main engine, your propulsion engines, your auxiliary engines, your boils, and you're really narrowing it down as opposed to just getting like a distance profile. And we felt that that was more appropriate because it's actually measuring the emissions that are within our control. And then by taking into account the different, zones, you could say, in terms of anchorage, transiting, maneuvering, and then on berth, it gave us a really good profile and where we can actually make or have those influence. So, we can't really do anything about the transit down. We can look at lower speeds, but that's generally, we have a, speed throughout the harbor. So we just felt it was more appropriate to use the EPA guidance, which a number of ports are already using, as opposed to allocating that port-to-port emissions.
So is that melting in sort of scope 3 emissions into sort of scope 2, where you do have control over certain things such as berthing but also acknowledging that the travel is going to be a huge part of it too.
So not necessarily lumping it into scope 2, more, so it does go into scope 3, because essentially we look at it as we're providing the service to the vessels. So we're providing them with a pilot on board, we're providing them with the tugs that maneuver them, and then the use of the berthing. So we look at it in terms of that service.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Now, we are definitely out of time. I've got 3 questions left, and I'll just have to get everyone to email Matt, and you can get them to put them to the right person, please, because otherwise we're just out of gear. Or we can have another workshop, because there's a lot of interest in this, which is great. But thank you very much for coming in. It's been very worthwhile. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Right-ho, so, I don't know, or just put stuff into OCE and they'll put it to the right person. Okay, so now we have Brendan, who's going to give us an update on space weather. That's what's written here. How are you, mate?
Good morning all. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you about space weather. Just want to caveat at the start of this presentation, and I'm not an expert. I'm reporting the information that we have. The expertise in space weather is held in the scientific community. I'm a layman trying to pass it on to interested parties. So space weather, and we'll go through a couple of definitions in here, has always existed, and it's a part of the natural climate of the universe. And I won't go through and read each of these slides today too, but you'll get the message we're trying to portray here. Why is it suddenly a big deal? It's been around for a very long time. But as the world becomes more interconnected and the technology around the planet becomes more comprehensive, the potential impacts and risks increase at the same rate. And you'll see some figures there, $2 trillion, 40 million people, and blackouts lasting up to 2 years. That would be a massively consequential event. And we're not saying that's due to happen anytime soon, but on the spectrum of consequences, that's where it could get to. So it goes through an 11-year cycle, and 2025 is the peak 11-year cycle. What happens with the sun is it reverses polarity. The north and south pole of the sun change every 11 years, and at solar maximum, the solar activity increases through that period there. So that's what we're expecting to see over the course of this year. There's some description of the space weather phenomenon. We'll go through a couple today. Including the 3 at the bottom that are noted there, G, S, and R, and we'll talk about those because they get reported on via various international agencies, NOAA out of the States and Bureau of Meteorology in Australia, and we get updates on those quite regularly. So there's an alerting system. New Zealand has a national space weather plan which was drawn up by the National Emergency Management Agency last year. It uses a similar scale to the rest of the world. We have a national space weather plan. We don't have a local space weather plan. Given the way that these events play out, there isn't a great need for there to be a local emergency plan for this, although there will be some need for business continuity planning for affected organisations and agencies. We've deliberately put in here a cooking metaphor, which seems, it's kind of fun, but it helps explain how these different elements of space weather play out. So rather than trying to explain it to you in a technical term, we've used a cooking analogy, which we found when we're talking to other groups about it, helped understand how these impacts can play out. So solar flares, you'll see that, very quick and can burn you. And solar flares, you'll note in there that the arrival time from the sun to the earth is 8 minutes. So that is literally an event that arrives at the speed of light. That cannot be any faster. The next one, CMEs, coronal mass ejections, sorry. again, over sort of half a day to over a couple of days. So we get a little bit of advance warning for those ones, but also some pretty significant impacts as well. And particle radiation, and that can take from almost the speed of light up to several hours. So different types of space weather can arrive in different speeds and for different durations as well too. It's not a single event that is easily predicted. Thank you. Some of my best work.
Excellent.
Hopefully this will play. Am I able to make this play from my end, or is it your end? There's a very short video in here. If we can't get it up and running today, it's not a big deal. It'll take us to YouTube. Yeah, it may not be the best place to do that. It's a 2.5 or nearly 3
million miles
minute.
away with a tremendous burst of energy from auroras may look stunning from here on Earth, but the geomagnetic storms that cause them could also pose a potential threat to our planet. Here's why. It all starts 93 million miles away with a tremendous burst of energy from the sun. These explosions can be categorized into 2 events, CMEs or solar flares. A CME, or coronal mass ejection, is a giant cloud of particles hurled into space. This phenomenon will typically take between 1 to 5 days to reach the Earth. A solar flare is a giant burst of X-rays and energy, which takes about 8 minutes to make it to our planet. These space weather events only impact Earth when the explosion occurs on the side of the sun that is facing our planet. The explosions produce a gust of solar wind, which hurls through space, temporarily disrupting the outer part of Earth's magnetic field. This causes a geomagnetic storm, also referred to as a solar storm. Particles flowing from the sun get caught up in the Earth's magnetic field, creating a colorful aurora, otherwise known as the northern or southern lights. The particles interact with molecules of atmospheric gases, causing glowing red and green colors in the sky, usually only seen in far northern and southern regions like Iceland or New Zealand. A solar storm can wreak havoc on Earth, but not in the way you think. While the atmosphere protects us from these harmful rays, a large storm can interfere with radio communication, GPS systems, and satellites, can corrode oil and gas pipelines, and even cause power blackouts. While scientists have observed thousands of solar flares over the years, none have matched the intensity of the 1859 Carrington event. The largest geomagnetic storm in recorded history, it crippled telegraphs around the world as sparks flew from equipment, shocking their human operators and even starting fires. The solar storm created an aurora so bright that people in the northeastern U.S. reportedly used the storm's glow to read the newspaper at night. In the 21st century, this event would have had a much more severe impact on today's technology-dependent society. Scientists estimate that a solar storm of that magnitude today has the potential to cost nearly $2 trillion, affect up to 40 million people, and cause blackouts lasting between 16 days to 2 years. Solar activity like sun flares and CMEs fluctuates in 11-year cycles, and right now, it's on the rise. Scientists predict this stormy activity will reach its peak in 2025.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this video, check out these other videos from USA Today to stay up to date with all the latest.
Don't tend to turn up with good news. So I think the video kind of speaks for itself. In here is a little bit more information around the geomagnetic storms. Won't go into that in great detail, but needless to say, as the duty officers within the civil defence team, we're monitoring this. We get alerts as they come through. If needed, we'll escalate this information through to the controller. But largely, this is an information session only. So you'll see geomagnetic storms there, solar radiation, S, and the final one are coming up as well. So then we have some impacts, and again, we won't go through this in detail, but it's worthwhile just sort of listing the potential impacts across society and the community, various agencies and other sectors as well. And you can see it's pretty extensive. One of the impacts in there, which we won't dwell on for too long, but just worthwhile mentioning, nuclear timing, which is the method that nearly every electronic device uses to understand what the time is. So a key function of all electronics, nuclear timing will be affected as well, and that will be highly disruptive. And finally, the social impacts, which will be potentially very significant. So that's a very quick run through on what is potentially a very significant risk. Again, I'm not an expert by any means, but happy to, I guess.
Absolutely. No, thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Also, we do have people from our IT and our water team here in case people have got questions about how they'll be planning to respond. Yeah.
Right. That's actually very sobering. Aaron? Please.
Yeah, so obviously Orion and all that are aware of this, and I learned of it a few months ago. I'd never heard of the Carrington event, but all the telegraph poles and that caught fire. So we will lose, if we got one as big as the Carrington, would lose pretty much all our power. Like, do we know what our restart is on all of that? And the ones that I'd be most concerned about is how well is the hospital planning and prison planning, so our priority 1 buildings for that event?
All very good questions. And I don't have the answer for that.
Because we're covered for the Alpine Fault and all of those, they're all planned for, but this one, it would be nice to know like how well we can back up the hospital and the prisons first and foremost, and then beyond that, everything else comes
Probably
up.
the water system and wastewater system is as critical.
Yes, and wastewater would be probably.
This is all good stuff to get us thinking about things, because otherwise we'll just go not blindly on, but it's good to bring these into focus.
So the National Space Weather Plan has been widely circulated. The Department of Corrections have got it, the Ministry of Health have got it, all those agencies you'd expect to have it have all participated in the planning and the discussion around this document. So good questions. I don't have the answers on the tip of my tongue, but those agencies definitely know about this.
And when you get you get a total knockout like that, does all the fuel priority go to the hospitals and stuff like that they keep running?
There is a national fuel plan, but the national fuel plan is dependent on power getting the fuel out of the ground.
Right. Yep.
Absolutely. Okay, that's very good, Brendan. And as time goes by, if you get more information, please feel free to come to us and keep us updated, because it's interesting. We need to know. Okay, thank you very much. Good-yo. Right now, so thank you, Brendan. That is the end of our public information sessions. We'll now break for lunch. We'll meet up in the Mayor's Lounge at 1:15.